Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian and Universalist congregation of Cleveland. My name is Mark Weber. We are glad that you are here today. We welcome you to our spiritual community. And since our service this morning will address racial justice, I would like to open our service this morning with a very brief observation from Frederick Douglass. He wrote, "Those who profess to favor freedom and yet quietly deprecate agitation for it are people who want crops without plowing up the ground." We have two announcements this morning. The first announcement is about a meeting to sort of summarize the 5-week course in January and February on the 8th principle. This meeting will take place at 1 o'clock on Sunday, February 27th, here at the church. As you probably know, a good number of congregants have already taken and learned from the 5-week course on the 8th principle that I just mentioned. Now all congregants will have a chance to get the 1-hour mini version and to ask questions about the 8th principle and the process within the UUA for discussing it and reviewing it. Please watch for the link in Thursday's newsletter. And our second announcement will be provided by David Cantor, and with some reluctance, I call David Cantor up to the microphone.
Always hate following Mark Weber here, connected to this. And Mark, thank you so much for that warm and welcoming introduction this morning. Hi everybody, I'm David Cantor. Privileged to serve this year as your congregation's treasurer and member of the stewardship committee. I'm pinch hitting today for Lou Salza and Barbie Jones, our stewardship co-chairs, who couldn't be here today. To his credit, Lou wrote up quite a script for me to use in my comments this morning. I am not using that script. He had all sorts of flowery stuff he wanted me to share with you about supporting the congregation that supports you, about this being the place where you can find your best selves and build community, supporting the call to stewardship, and all sorts of stuff like that. But I'm not saying anything. Instead, I'm going to offer you a fun opportunity. The official stewardship kickoff date is a couple of weeks from now in early March. And like last year, we're going to produce a bunch of stewardship videos that feature members of our congregation. Well, we got so much positive feedback last year on those videos, with people asking how they could get in on the action. Well, here's how you can do that. Next Sunday, well, before and after the service, Count White's going to set up the baker room where you can record a quick video. You'll have a comfy place to sit. She'll ask you a few questions. You'll give her a few answers, and you'll be on your way. Yep, it really is that simple. Depending on the flow of the videos, perhaps you'll end up being a star in one, or maybe you'll end up on the cutting room floor. But hey, you can't be in it if you don't do the video. And yes, show business can be a very tough business. If you have any questions, call or text me. My number is in the directory, of course, but I'll give it to you anyway, so you can write it down right now. It's still important to all of you. 216-533-9652, or email me at davekcg@gmail.com. If you can't remember any of this, I'll be in the newsletter on the blast on Thursday. That's davekcg@gmail. Hope you take us up on this. I hope to see you all in the movies. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, David. And now we will have our chalice lighting. We will read together from the words located on the bright yellow card in the pew rack in front of you. So let us read together. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Thank you.
We have had so much fun with our last 7 weeks of Chalice that we've decided to extend it another week with an 8th week, an unprecedented 8th week of Chalice. And so we are called to worship today by these words of Viola Abbott. We are Unitarian Universalists. When we lift up our 7 principles, some of us think of them as a form of theology, but they are more important to our collective than that. They do not tell us what we should believe. They tell us how we should be. They tell us how we should act in the larger world and with one another. We recognize the fact that Unitarian Universalism has fallen short of the image that was presented to the world and to many of those who embrace this religion. But we also recognize the truth that Unitarian Universalism can shift course and move toward a place of wholeness, a place that perhaps has never before existed for this denomination. It is a long and sometimes unforgiving road, but we are here today because we are mindful of the past and because we have hope for the future. We want the practice of this faith to be a fulfilling manifestation of its promise. So I invite you to open your hearts, seek new ways of understanding, and come let us worship together. In just a moment, we're going to sing I Wish I Knew How. The words are in your order of service, but if you wish to use the hymnal, it's number 151 in the gray hymnal. But first, let's take a moment to respectfully greet one another, mindful of people's need for distance during our COVID times. But let's take just a moment to say good morning. If you see someone you don't recognize, make sure you say hello to them too. Now is the time in our service where we share our joys and concerns. And I'm glad to see that we've got some things in the book. I'll just remind you that if there's something you want shared with the congregation, we do have a book that's in the back before the service. And you can write a few words here to be shared with the congregation during this time. And if you're joining us online, I invite you to put whatever joy or concern you want to share in the comments, and folks will be able to see them, and we can share our joys so that they are magnified and share our burdens so that they are lessened. I have a slight concern, but a greater joy that Carol Gibson is recovering well from a pulmonary embolism on Thursday. So we send her continued healing, and we send deep comfort to Tom. We also place a stone today for Ralph Spresser, Judy Holder's father, who is now in at-home hospice care. And a stone of gratitude that Karen Tooley is much better today, recovering from COVID. I invite you forward to place a stone of your own for anything that you are bringing with you today, or perhaps something you're ready to let go of as we continue in worship. and place one final stone for those joys or concerns that are not quite ready to be expressed openly.
Well, good morning, everyone. I have a little show and tell today that I brought that I'm pretty excited to share. These are my Legos. This prized possession of mine, because this is the old form Star Wars set of Legos. This is a TIE Interceptor for any Star Wars nerds out there. I've been watching all the Disney Plus Star Wars shows lately, so I've been thinking about them a lot, and then went back in my closet and made sure I got out my old Star Wars set of Legos. So much fun putting something like this together, and now that I'm an adult, I can afford them. So, weirdly, this is not a childhood inherited set. This is an adult purchase based on my own nerd and excitement. Of course, when you're a child, you never have this. No children have this, or I should say very few children come into their adult hands with a lot of boxes of individual Lego sets. And there's a very good reason for that. It's because the natural status of Legos is, without question, a gigantic rubber tub full of like 50 of these that have all been emptied out over the years into a gigantic mass of Legos. Like that's the natural state of Legos is like by the pound. We're not talking about something that holds on. We don't hold on to the instruction books. We don't rebuild our models. No, you put them all together in a big box. That's my own sort of hot take about Legos. The actual natural state of Legos is it's all about getting past this thing that it comes in. You have to get to the point where you realize these are just toys that you get to play with, and it can become anything. It doesn't have to be restricted to the instructions that come in the box. They can become something else. I thought this was, of course, my own special experience of Legos until just a few years ago. We had a fantastic film came out called The Lego Movie. Now, if any of you here have not seen The Lego Movie, go watch it. One of the smartest movies in many years, and especially for a movie geared at children, hugely sophisticated, extremely thoughtful movie. I won't give you any of the details, but what I will say is this. You realize the sophistication of the Lego Movie when you realize that the bad guy, the bad entity, the thing, the worst part of the world in the Lego Movie is, of course, only about actual Legos. It's crazy glue. Now, why would crazy glue be like an enemy in Lego Movie? Well, it's because that is what ruins Legos. Something an adult would do playing with Legos. You glue this down into some shape that it can't ever get out of. So Legos are amazing in that way, and Lego Movie does a great job of showing us off, but just playing with them will also show this to you. They become an extraordinary way of thinking about actually our experience in the world and our role as it is that we are constantly creating the world that we live in, just like a set of Legos. But the lessons, they come when you realize all the things that are in place here. One thing is that you realize that the things the world is made of, just like Legos, they're bricks that are solid, but they don't really mean anything until you start putting them together into shapes, into other forms, to other figures. A brick in and of itself is just an inert little thing in the box, but once you take it out of the box, you start combining it with other things, it takes on shape, it takes on meaning, it takes on value, all kinds of things. The other thing is that instruction books exist, but I hope it's no surprise to you, congregation, you get to do whatever you want with the bricks. You can make what's in the box for sure. You can also throw that instruction book out and make whatever you want. Here's the other side of that, though. And this one's trickier and maybe a little bit harder for us as a youth congregation to deal with. We can't not use the bricks. In fact, for our purposes, we're stuck with them.
The bricks we have from the sets we bought, even if we have that big plastic tub in front of us, we do have to contend with the bricks that we have. And that means you have to contend with your history and the ones you bought. Maybe for me, like I've got 15 Star Wars sets. Maybe I have a longer set of things, and I have other themes, and I have to put Knights on Horseback next to Harry Potter, next to Marvel Comics, who knows. But again, we do get to do whatever we want with these bricks, and there's a courage that comes from the knowledge of that idea that we are the makers. And the courage comes from the fact that we should never be afraid to trash something that we've built that doesn't work for us anymore. Nothing is ever stopping us from dismantling the set we got and turning it into something else. Now, if I was brave and if we had a different set of worship resources here, I would have built this entirely together, and then for dramatic effect, I would have thrown it up in the air and it crashed. And everyone would have been like, ooh, crashing. But we don't have that. And I didn't want to actually lose any pieces. Because I am an adult. And I do love this Lego set. But at the same time, from that lack of an object lesson, that courage also comes with an obligation then to realize that once you do have that thing, that floor full of Legos, just waiting in all its potentiality, all you have to do, the next step, the next obvious thing, is to build something new.
As we enter the centering portion of our service this morning, we will have 3 readings. It's my pleasure to read the first one. It is entitled, Dear Liberal Allies, written by Trung Lee Nguyen, who is a comic book artist, philosopher really, and also a beekeeper who lives in Minnesota. Dear liberal allies, you and I learned very different things in very different ways. If you didn't live an experience, please step aside. We, students of color, gay students, trans students, children of immigrants and refugees, we knew this stuff before our professors told us what to call it. We learned it from the bottom up. You learned it another way. You received a set of keywords and a list of definitions. Your learning was, in all likelihood, here is this word, and this is what it means. For you, it was xenophobia, a strong fear or dislike of people from other countries or who are different than we are. For us, xenophobia is the time that boy in my kindergarten class spat on me because I couldn't speak English yet. Or when I saw that clerk yell at my mom in the grocery store because her English wasn't clear enough. For you, it was racism, the unfair treatment of people who belong to another race, violent behavior towards them. For us, it was racism. That one time I saw the manager tell the sales girl to follow my dad around at Kohl's. Or that one time my neighbor's kid got shot by the police and they tried to cover it up by saying that he was in a gang. But everyone knew he wasn't. or the time my dad told me I shouldn't rollerblade to the library because I'm not white and it's not safe for me. For you, homophobia is a strong dislike or fear of homosexual people. For us, it was homophobia, the time in 6th grade when Ryan shoved me up against a glass door and banged my face in it while yelling faggot at me until the teacher finally stopped him. Or when my Catholic high school's president told me that although he loved me as a child of God, he still believed I was sinful. For you, it was classism, prejudice or discrimination based on social class. For us, it was classism, the time when my best friend came over to hang out. But then her parents didn't want her to come over anymore because they didn't like the neighborhood in which we lived. Or that one time when my friends had no idea what food stamps looked like, and I was too embarrassed to explain what they were. So while you were learning that all these academically framed phenomena were real problems, we were getting figurative name tags for awful things that we already knew. Your weekly vocabulary list was, to us, just a hollow shadow of our lived experiences. When you step out of class, you get to say, oh, how awesome. I'm learning how to be a really good ally and a better human being. This will help me. For us, it's more like, so that's what they're calling it nowadays. What exactly, when exactly did they say change was going to come for us? These were the words of Trung Lee Win. Thank you.
Resmaa Menakem teaches somatic abolitionism, which is a living, embodied anti-racism practice and culture building that requires endurance, agility, resource cultivation, stamina, discernment, self and communal discipline, embodied racial literacy, and humility. Here's what he writes. For most of our history, the white body has had full and unfettered access to every part of my body. Every access point, every idea, every understanding. The white body has had full and unfettered access. That's not just a problem for me. That's also a problem for white folks, because it means that they expect my deference. When it doesn't happen, something happens inside of them, and that is not work that I can do. And so for me, this idea of racial healing starts with very tough, centered interrogation on what we're actually dealing with. not this kumbaya, pie in the sky, let's just all get along unity stuff. That's dead. I like that white people are nice to me, don't spit in my food, don't slap me upside the head, and don't shoot me in the back. I like that. But your individual niceness is inadequate to deal with the brutality and the viciousness of what white body supremacy is doing and has done to my people and to indigenous people.
I'm reading the words by the Reverend Dr. Natalie Fenimore. Shirley Chisholm was asked why she, a Black woman, was running for president. You don't have a chance. Why are you doing that? And she said, because I am in love with the America that does not yet exist. And that is how Unitarian Universalism is also. I am in love with the Unitarian Universalism that does not yet exist. But I have to hold both the love for that thing and the love for the reality. It does not yet exist. It will probably not exist in my lifetime. I don't think it will in that of my children, but I can't deny my love for it. You know, wanting to be there in that struggle. That's why I'm fighting.
The proceeds of our offertory this morning will go to the African American Museum of Cleveland. The African American Museum of Cleveland is the oldest self-funded, independent African American museum in the United States. Founded in 1954, today, the museum is housed in an historic Carnegie Library building at 1765 Carnegie Avenue. Sadly, the museum lacks an endowment and badly needs funds to address the physical disrepair of the building. Funding is necessary so that it can reopen and present to everyone a collection of documents that tell us about the rich history of African American life in Cleveland. Please give generously, but within your means. You are welcome to present your offering by putting it in the collection plates that is passed during this part of the service, But we also invite you, everyone, to give by way of the Cash App handle, $UUCC 44122. Thank you.
Receive our gifts together to the African American Museum of Cleveland. The words found on your cue card, or if you're at home, they'll be in the order of service. We offer these gifts with gratitude, and we acknowledge the constant gifts of time, talent, and treasure that strengthen and nourish this congregation as a reflection of our commitment to community within and without, our purposeful spirituality that is ever searching and growing, and our intentional actions that lead to greater justice in our congregation, our city, our nation, and our world. Now I invite you to rise in body or spirit as we sing together, Guide My Feet. Guide my feet, search my heart. It's kind of a prayer, a vulnerable request, acknowledging that we are headed somewhere. We are running a race, and it's not a gentle, casual stroll. It's a challenging, purposeful journey toward wholeness, and we're going to make some missteps. We're going to make some mistakes, and so we know we need a bit of guidance from Goddess, God, life, all of the above, however you name the divine. Guide my feet. Or maybe for you, it's not about a request of something outside of yourself, some divine out there, but it's a calling within to that deepest, most noble part of yourself. Search my heart, guide my steps so that my feet are walking with integrity to the things that I say really matter to me. Or if not that, maybe it's a request of one another. We are running this race together. We are headed in a direction. We've got this powerful vision. So you guide my steps and I'll guide your steps, and we'll get there with one another. It's a prayer of accountability, mutuality. The song was used at Ministry Days a few years ago. Ministry Days is that time just before General Assembly when Unitarian Universalist ministers all gather together for mutual support and fellowship and learning. And this song was used at one of the worship services there. And it caused a bit of a stir. There were some people who were wounded by this song, not because of the theology that they had that seemed different from this song, but because they heard these words as being ableist. There are people who do not move through the world by running races or even standing. And so they heard these words and they were wounded by them. They felt these words don't reflect my experience of moving through the world. And I have to tell you, my initial response to them talking about this wound was not particularly kind or compassionate. Because I thought, can we not use metaphorical language anymore? Can we not recognize that we're talking about a symbolic race, that nobody is actually running while we sing this song, and we're really asking for one another to be in solidarity maybe, or we're asking for something that we don't have language for, and so we use this instead? And it wasn't particularly mindful of the wound that was being expressed. I was more concerned in how I was being restricted, or that somebody was trying to cause trouble. And I had to examine some things about my reaction. I didn't have to, I chose to. And in that examination, I realized that if I wanted to be the kind of colleague that I say I want to be, that I'll acknowledge the wound that's being expressed instead of how it inconveniences me. That when somebody says, I'm hurting in this way, my first response will be, that doesn't look so bad. What are you complaining about? But instead I'll say, oh my goodness, that sounds really painful. Can I do something? Because maybe I can't. Maybe the only thing I can do is say, that sounds really painful, and just acknowledge it. But maybe I can do something. Maybe it will inconvenience me a little bit. But if I'm the kind of colleague that I say I want to be, then that wound is more important than me being inconvenienced. And I've been thinking about that moment, that shift within myself as we think about the eighth principle. We haven't really talked about the eighth principle as a congregation. I know some of you were in beloved conversations, and so you may have broached the eighth principle in that discussion. I know that several of you were in our adult religious exploration course just for the last few weeks about the eighth principle, and so you've gotten to engage in conversation. But as a community, we haven't really talked about it very much. It's a proposed principle. It's not official, although a lot of Unitarian Universalist congregations have voted on it and said, we adopt this as one of our principles. All UU congregations haven't even talked about it yet. And I think one of the reasons is that sometimes we avoid acknowledging emotional, spiritual, psychological, moral injuries by deflecting them. We want to wordsmith things, we want to intellectualize things because it feels a little too unsafe to engage with those injuries directly. And the proposed eighth principle asks us to engage with that kind of wound pretty vulnerably. So it's a lot easier to just intellectualize things and try to parse out the words and figure out how can we make this sound like one of our other principles, and what word would be better here than this thing. We don't really talk about the principle. So I'm thinking about my reaction today because I know that within me there is that tendency to ignore a wound that isn't pleasant for me to address. And the eighth principle comes out of that sense of wound. It's been proposed by a group called Black Lives of UU, BLUU. And they come out of the intersection of Unitarian Universalism and the Black Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter movement is fairly recent, but the wound that they are talking about goes back almost as far as our denomination. Because just after the merger, just after Unitarians and Universalists got together back in the early 60s and said, we're going to be one group now, we're going to be one spiritual community, one association. In the late 60s, there was some friction between Unitarian Universalists and the Black empowerment movement. And that friction led to the Black Unitarian Universalists at the time leaving. A lot, not all of them, but a lot of them left. They said, our theology is not being respected here, our identities are not being valued, and we do not see that there is a place for us here. And so they left. So that wound goes back almost as long as Unitarian Universalism has been a thing. And when we talk about white supremacy culture, sometimes we get bristly about that because it sounds like somebody's calling us a racist. And that's not what white supremacy culture really is. It's about white folks making decisions that work for them without really thinking about whether it works for other people or whether it does harm to other people. And in Unitarian Universalist land, white folks were mostly what was left. So the decisions that were being made about what Unitarian Universalism should look like after the Black empowerment movement friction, after that wound, the folks who were left to make decisions were white folks making decisions for a mostly white denomination. And we are still a mostly white denomination. So we didn't have other voices in the conversation. And that's what we mean by a white supremacy culture. White folks making decisions that make sense to them without other voices being a part of the conversation. And that's just naturally what happened. Now, the past couple of decades, we've been talking a lot more about multiculturalism. We've been realizing that we need that. We need a multicultural faith community if we're going to be who we say we want to be. But we've gotten used to doing things a certain way. We've gotten used to living out our 7 principles in a way that makes sense to us, in a way that feels comfortable to us. And as Unitarian Universalists, we want our denomination to be different. We want our faith tradition to be different, but we don't want to change anything that we're doing because we've gotten comfortable with it doing things a certain way, interpreting things a certain way. We haven't been particularly good as an institution at listening to the voices of people who are marginalized. We haven't been particularly good as an institution at caring for people who are marginalized by society, but also by us as an institution. So I'm not talking about any individual here. I'm not even talking about anything that this congregation has done. The injury is bigger than that. When we're looking at the eighth principle, we're being asked to engage with a wound that is bigger than any of us as individuals or this community itself. And here's what Black Lives of UU proposes as the eighth principle. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote. That's the way all of our principles start. That's the preamble for all the other 7 principles. So that part, we covenant to affirm and promote, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community, capital B, capital C, just like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, beloved community, by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. And now some of you say, that's pretty wordy. That doesn't sound like our other principles. That sounds like a mission statement. That sounds like it's a call to action. Our other principles are like ideals. You know, the inherent worth and dignity of every person is this ideal. But that's not what our other principles are. We say that we affirm and promote. We covenant as Unitarian Universalists to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every individual. We don't just covenant to think that this is a nice idea. We covenant to act on it. That's what affirming and promoting means, is that we take action that reflects what we believe. So it's not different. Maybe it's longer, but it's not different in that respect from our other principles. We just like to think of our other principles as nice ideas because that's safer. Our other principles are challenging calls to action. And then you say, well, wait a minute, if that's true, then our other 7 principles cover this. If we're acting to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and if we're acting to promote justice and equity and compassion in our human relationships, and if we're doing all of these things that we say that we covenant to do, we don't need an 8th principle. We should already be doing this. It's covered. And yet the people who are proposing the 8th principle says, well, it should be, but it hasn't been. That wound has not been addressed. We've gotten used to living our 7 principles in a way that pretends that this wound doesn't exist in our country, in our individual lives, in our denomination. And so they're saying, we need to make this important. If we want to be the spiritual community we say we want to be, we need to name it. And by naming it, we recognize, well, if we have been acting with integrity to our other principles, we might not need this 8th principle. But we might need this 8th principle to engage us in the real work that scares us. The work that we have to do if we want to be a beloved community, if we want the multiculturalism that we say is important to us. And so we need to be called to accountably act in a way that dismantles racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our communities. And then you say, what does it accountably mean, though? Because I don't like that whole accountability thing. That doesn't feel very good. Accountability seems punitive sometimes. But it's not supposed to be. Accountability is supposed to be mutual agreement that we are headed in a direction, we are following a path, and we need to guide one another's progress on that path because we're going to make some missteps, but we both want to go in the same direction. And so it's mutual. It's not a top-down kind of thing. Accountability is saying, here's the journey that we're on. Let's keep each other on track. That's what accountability is. We hear it differently because people don't necessarily treat it that way. But if we want to model accountability, it doesn't have to be a scary thing. It's just a way that we guide one another's feet, or steps, or motion, or whatever. So to whom are we accountable? Well, we're accountable to one another because we have committed to acting in a way that demonstrates our values unapologetically, especially when it comes to dismantling oppressive speech and behavior. So we're accountable to one another, but we're also accountable to the people who are hurting, the people who are saying, we have this wound, and we're going to bring it up, and we're going to lift it up so that it's in the light. We're accountable to those people too. We don't get to decide how hurt they should be. We don't get to decide how wounded they really are by our system. That's not our responsibility. We don't have to worry about that. We don't bear the burden of deciding how hurt another person should feel. What we get to do is listen with love and compassion and respond with integrity to our principles. That's what we get to do. We get to be the people that we say we want to be. That's what we get to do. We don't have to decide how hurt someone else is. We don't have to decide how serious their wound really is. We get to be the loving, compassionate, intentional people we say we want to be. And this is about institutions. As I said, this is a big injury. This is not just about us as individuals. But it is about us as individuals. Because if we want multicultural community, we have to have multicultural lives. That's what a community is. It's a place where we bring all of our lives together with one another. And we can't have multicultural community without having multicultural lives. And we can't have multicultural lives unless we're willing to address some of the oppressive beliefs and behaviors and stuff inside of us. No, I did not just call you a racist.
It's okay.
I'm glad you're laughing at that instead of walking out. That's nice. I didn't call you racist, I called you human. Because every human being develops oppressive ideas and behaviors and habits. We do that. We just do it. It's just a thing. And if we're willing to explore that and examine it and do something about it, then we can build the beloved community we say matters to us. If we're scared of looking at those things, if we're scared of dismantling some of our oppressive behaviors and habits, then we're not going to have the community that we want. And dismantling is not about hurting ourselves so that other people feel better. That's not what dismantling is. And dismantling isn't about losing our own identities. Dismantling is that thing when you take something apart and you look at all of the pieces and figure out if there's a better way for them to go back together again. You don't actually have to get rid of all of the pieces of your theology. You can dismantle your theology, you can dismantle your way of thinking about community and examine those pieces and decide, all of these go together really well. I'm going to put them back together again. Maybe we need to clean some of them off. But we can use all of those pieces just like a Lego set. We can build something, well, maybe we build something new. We look at all of those Legos and say, you know what, maybe we build something else out of this. We have built one thing before, but we can build something new with all of these pieces. That's what dismantling is about. Dismantling requires some vulnerability, but it isn't about tearing down something that we value. Dismantling is about examining our ways of doing things so that we aren't missing big swaths of our behavior that might be hurtful to other people and to ourselves. Because this journey towards spiritual wholeness is about spiritual wholeness for all of us. If we've got some glaring blind spots in our way of building community, we cannot be spiritually whole. The only way we get to be spiritually whole is if we're able to examine what we do, the way that we believe, the way that we think, the way that we act, the way that we speak, and say, yes, this is who I want to be. Yes, this lines up with my values. Or, no, where did this come from? Why am I doing this way? This seems really off. When did this habit develop? Let me stop doing this. This doesn't work. Dismantling is about being willing to vulnerably examine what we're doing and ask, does this create what I really want to create? And if we're willing to do that with one another, then we can be a little more vulnerable with it and still feel like we get to have our identities, we get to have who we are. It's not about annihilation, it's about being intentional. So what are we afraid of? When we hear that 8th principle, when you hear those words, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. What scares you about that? Not what words do you want to change, because that's intellectualizing it, and when we intellectualize things, that's a big red flag that there's something we're avoiding. Not saying, I don't know if that really is a principle or not, because that's our way of saying, I don't really want to look at that injury, that's scary. What scares you about that principle? Are you afraid of being held accountable? Maybe we're afraid we're going to discover something we're ashamed of within ourselves if we dismantle something, and we're going to have to do some hard work. Maybe we're afraid that we've got something to hide, and we don't want to be exposed out in front of everybody if we're being held accountable for things. That feels vulnerable. That's scary. Maybe we're afraid of dismantling things because we're afraid we're going to have to let go of something that we really value. Maybe we're afraid that we're going to have to experience some pain that has never been required of us before if we do this work. Or we're afraid that we'll have to hurt in the way that others have hurt in order to build the community that we long for. That can be scary. Being afraid that we'll have to experience wounding comparable to what others experience on a daily basis in order to truly find spiritual wholeness. It's a risk. Building multicultural community built on justice, equity, and compassion that honors the inherent worth and dignity of every individual, that's vulnerable work. It doesn't happen automatically. It hasn't happened automatically. And that's why this 8th principle has been proposed for our consideration, so that we have an opportunity to do what we say we want to do. We may need to take things apart and look at how all the pieces have fit together. Look at all the pieces that we're working with and decide how we want to reassemble them purposefully together. So we're going to sing a song now. We're going to sing Lift Every Voice. And I want to tell you about this song. It was written and composed by the Johnson brothers, who are a pair of influential men in Jacksonville, Florida. James Weldon Johnson wrote the lyrics. The elder Johnson, he was a lawyer, diplomat, professor, prolific writer and poet. And coincidentally, he was the first African-American leader of the NAACP. At the time he wrote this song in 1899, he was the principal of the segregated Stanton School in Jacksonville, Florida. And his brother, John Rosamond Johnson, wrote the music. The younger Johnson trained at the New England Conservatory of Music, and during his long musical career, he composed and performed stage musicals and operettas. His work spanned multiple genres, from vaudeville and traditional theater to spirituals and other deeply rooted African-American traditions. And among the Black leaders of the day, this song captured something that they valued, because education, artistic excellence, and the power of Black communities of faith were sources of strength and keys to progress. And Lift Every Voice and Sing was at one time a history, a proclamation, and a vision for the future. It immediately resonated with Black communities and institutions. So in 1919, the NAACP proclaimed this song the Negro National Anthem, a full 12 years before the Star Spangled Banner was adopted as the country's national anthem. It's an omnipresent part of Black worship traditions. For more than a century, Lift Every Voice and Sing has held a powerful place in American history, and the hymn known as the Black National Anthem is more than a hymn. It's a history lesson, it's a rallying cry, it's a pledge of unity. And so it is with respect to that history, in solidarity on the journey toward racial justice and equity, and with all due humility and hope, that I invite you to rise in body or spirit as we sing together, Lift Every Voice and Sing. We continue in our COVID covenant, which is on the yellow pew cards that you have, or if you're at home, you can read along, even though you'll probably say this out of all of us. But together we read, "In beloved community, we welcome everyone, absolutely everyone, into this space of worship and fellowship. In this time of pandemic, we covenant to respect one another by considering the safety and comfort of others before ourselves. to respect the policies our leadership has established, and to take all of our steps with one another with grace and understanding as we work to make this a truly safe place for all people. May we be courageous in the dismantling that needs to happen within each of us in our community so that we are the people in the community we long to be. Go with peace and courage.
And let us read together the words for the extinguishing of the chalice. Read together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we come together.
Thank you.